Then, thank you, Amy Chu. My name is John Shaleski. I'm the president of Reading with Pictures. And before we get in this conversation with Amy, I want to say thank you very, very, very much to everybody who's done cat herding to make this thing work. Tracy Edmonds is the chair of this event. Janet Tropper, chief cat herding specialist. Kate Pearl, who's actually behind the scenes right now with our technology, Heather Bryan, who's been managing social media for us, Shveta Miller, Michael Gian Francisco, Ronell Whitaker, the rest of the crew. You guys, thank you for all the blood, sweat, and tears, many hours, hundreds of hours planning for this event. I first got to see Amy on a panel at one of the earliest New York Comic Cons. Oh, and Derek Hyde too. Thank you, Kate. I appreciate that. Derek's out in San Diego. We are a nationwide organization here. But I got to see Amy talk on a panel at one of the first New York Comic Cons, and it was wonderful to hear. There's something I feel almost musical about when I see a speaker or hear somebody talk about the craft or the things we learn or how we teach with the medium of comics. And I'm going to let her give her a little bio because she did mention something about MIT. But one of my prized possessions is this book by Amy and Janet Lee, and it's signed. But it's a great story, aside from it being signed in my own collector's heart. But every time I see you speak, I learn something, and it's I without fail. It's never the same pattern, never the same talking points. There's always something more that you bring to the conversation. So thank you for being our closing keynote speaker for this event. And thank you, Pixton and Scholastic, for supporting us. And now, Amy, I'm going to turn this over to you.
I'm sure. Thank you so much. First of all, this is a tremendous honor to be closing this out. And I was going in and out during the whole session, and it's just really so wonderful that something like this even exists, and you can do it online and even from the comfort of your own home, so you don't have to schlep like we all did to New York Comic Con and breathe the air of 100,000 people. So this is actually very nice. I am coming to you live from Johns Hopkins University, actually, where my son is a freshman. And he is, so I'm going to try to talk about a little bit about my bio while I'm talking about how my child has not been corrupted by the evils of comics, having essentially spent all his formative years helping me out, making the comics and reading the comics all over the house. So, and I do see some people putting some questions, and please put more questions in there, and I'll try to address them as I go along. Because what I wanted to talk about a little bit was kind of my journey to comics and how I do try to incorporate comics and learn comics in the classroom, but also learning into mainstream comics. Some of you may already know I am, John so graciously showed our lovely book, Sky Island, also Sea Fairies, which was the first book, which was an adaptation of L. Frank Baum's wonderful series that we essentially modernized a bit and drew inspiration from. But I think a majority of people, especially at New York Comic Con, know me as a mainstream writer of, for Marvel and DC comics. And my actual first book was Poison Ivy, Cycle of Life and Death. That was literally my first book. My first DC story was Wonder Woman. That's how I broke into this business, is really writing fairly mainstream stuff. Now, I think what a lot of people don't also realize is that all along I've been also trying to do educational comics. And what I'll do is I'll show some of these off to you because I'm very proud of them, but also what I hope the effect is. And, to say again, and I do this at every single convention, I have a big table with a little sign that says it's a medium, not a genre. Just because I write superheroes, the genre, but it's not the medium. And I think that is the mistake that a lot of, and this hurts us all when people just think, oh, it's comics and it's just superhero stuff. Hey, I don't want to defend superhero stuff because I think superhero stuff is equally educational, but it's a mistake to continue to talk about comics as if it's just that one genre. A little bit about myself, and I don't want to so we were talking about MIT. So I am the product of a educational system where I came out of, let's see, I have actually 3 degrees, and this helps me. This helps. It's credentialing, right? I have a degree from Harvard, MIT, and Wellesley College, which of course is really necessary for breaking into comics. Of course not. It may be overkill, but I do want to talk about how all these degrees in learning actually help me in what I do. Now, what I'm going to start kind of like, well, how did I get into comics and why do I do comics now? And I do see some questions about, breaking in and all these kind of things, or how, aspiring. I was very much of an introvert growing up, a nerd. I would never have dreamt that I could actually talk, in any kind of setting. I was extremely shy. The only thing I did was, of course, read tremendously. I was so shy that I would just go to the library and read every single book. And that was kind of my MO for years, all the way up to college. And in 6th grade, and I remember this because my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Millar, basically assigned us an interesting project. And the project was to write, draw, and bind your own book, basically create your own book. And I'm like a straight A student at that time, not anymore, trust me, especially when I got into MIT. Had to write, draw, and bind a book, 6th grade. And this was like the best project ever. I did all that. And of course, I won the best book prize. It was the story, I had created the story about a wishing poodle, which was captured by some evil, greedy sisters who, of course, wished for the stars in the sky and the moon as jewelry. And of course, they basically created the apocalypse. And there was a lesson there that, just don't be greedy. Anyway, but there's also a lot of, sort of class, structure and morality in there that I didn't realize I'd put in when I was in 6th grade. Anyway, so you're thinking, oh, well, of course, and she just went on to comics from there. And no, that is actually not true. At the age of 12, that was my first and only award. I subsequently never, actually, for the next 30 years, never attempted to do anything creative. And I'm sure there's a moral here as well, as don't give up. But also, I was born in Boston. My parents are from Hong Kong, and I don't think it ever occurred to them to encourage me in anything creative, right? There's certainly a focus on going to MIT or going to Harvard, maybe going pre-med or something. Never discouraged me, but certainly never encouraged me to do what I was doing. Okay, so all this, fast forward 30 years later, is I had met up with a good friend of mine, also went to Harvard Business School, and she was also a Chinese American, good girl, did the whole thing, did biotech, all these things. And she wanted to write, and that was her path. I'm like, oh, you want to write? I'll help you, because I don't write. I'm not a creative person. And she said, well, she wanted to write comics. And I'm like, how hard can this be? You write them, I'll figure out how to publish them, because it's not rocket science, right? And her view, which I agreed, was like, well, you can't just help me. You actually have to learn how it's made. And, one should always learn how the sausage is made. I'm like, how hard can this be? I'll take the writing class just to see, because I know how to write a killer PowerPoint. I can write a good business plan, but I'm not a creative writer, but I'll see what this is about. And I took that class, and it was me and 12 guys who are all like, who are you? You don't know anything about Daredevil or even worse, Deadpool. And I'm like, well, so why does that matter? In the end, that's kind of where we've now entered the multiverse, where Amy Chu has now gone off into comics, just essentially to show the guys that I could do it. And now we have veered really crazily off this course, where I'm now also writing for Netflix, and all my Harvard, MIT, Wellesley classmates are like, what am I doing? That's a good question. What am I doing? And what I found is, and this is the magic quality, when people talk about finding your passion in life, okay? And this has always been an issue. It's like, what is the passion in your life? I don't want to say the passion has ever been comics, but I can say at this point, yes, because anybody who has, and I know some of you have, I see some familiar people in the audience, that making something, writing something, creating something is kind of a magical thing. And I just, creating a PowerPoint for a bunch of biotech investors is not magical. Trust me on that. Creating something like Sirens, or as we'll go into and I'll start sharing, this is magical. Let me just show you, because I'm in Baltimore right now, and I hope I can do this right. This is, can you all see that photo there? That is my son looking at a comic that I created for the Baltimore Museum of Art. And that's on display there. And it actually describes the origin story of a very classic Buddhist tale of the Bodhisattva Guanyin. Now, this is actually, right, you'll find this in religious texts and whatnot and everything. But the Baltimore Museum of Art actually commissioned something which they wanted something all ages to explain this story, because they have this gorgeous, beautiful statue on display there. And this was a chance to create something that was educational, but also quite beautiful. And I'm very proud of that. And that's my son actually looking at it. And let me also show you a little, let's see if I can do this. And that's the video of him actually interacting with that comic.
Also, there's like water. There's like
And
visual.
there's just something powerful about doing that, it's very gratifying. Now, while I'm sort of doing this, why do I keep doing comics when I didn't intend to do it? Part of it is that kind of experience. I've gone on to actually do quite a few more things. And in fact, let me just show you really quickly while I'm doing that, if I can. Some other oh, you know what? I'll show you what I'm actually working on right now, if I can pull this up. So there's a lot of things that are happening right now, particularly post-COVID. We're talking, we're in an era where there's been a tremendous amount of anti-Asian violence, backlash, not just, of course, Asian, but this affects me in particular. So I've been working on something that's very important, and will be hopefully coming out with in the next month, essentially. And this is an Asian American history graphic novel. I hope you can see that too, right? Which I'm lettering actually this weekend. This is the story of Chinese American immigration. This will be for a comic history overview that's geared towards middle graders, specifically 5th and 6th graders. And this will be talking about paper sons, paper daughters, and how the Chinese American Exclusion Act over 100 years ago really impacted the ability of, it was the only race-based, in fact, immigration act that was put in place, and it was in place for many years. And so this really explains that kind of history in hopefully a very accessible way for younger people. And I think this is something that has been missing from textbooks, or maybe addressed in a very cursory way. And I think this is our remedy, hopefully. This is funded by the Asian American Foundation. And this is something, again, that I have the ability to help out and do, and it's just, something that is much needed. So we're working on that right now. And so this is a great example of comics in the classroom, right? The other one was comics in the museum, but comics in an educational setting. Now, and what you're sort of like, okay, so that's great, but what what do I do with the normal, when I say normal comics that I do? John was asking me, and I think he found it very entertaining that a number of us really enjoy putting Easter eggs in our comics. For me, I do enjoy not just putting Easter eggs, but I do try to make my, I get a kick out of this. I do try to make my comics educational. In fact, one of the things I really delighted in doing is, and I'm not sure you're all familiar with this, but I am actually the first woman to write the KISS comics. If you're familiar with KISS, they were the first ones to really start doing these sort of branded celebrity comics back in something like 1976. So I'm the first woman to actually write such comics. And let's see if I can pull this up for you. What I found is that a lot of people, as long as I do a good story, nobody really cares. It's not like people ask me to do these things, but I thought it'd be really fun to sort of pepper my series, which of course is set in hell, with a lot of T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. So I basically, it's public domain, so I'm allowed to do this, but I pulled a lot of the text and I incorporated into so much that the main character is named Prufrock. So I don't know if your average, KISS reader is going to get it or not get it, but maybe they will be inspired to actually read the original text of The Wasteland, maybe read more poetry. Anyway, that's just something I really enjoy doing. The other thing that I really had fun with was Poison Ivy. And let's see if I can do this. I'm not sure I have it readily available, but I do want to show you one more thing. So I do feel very passionate, not just about creating comics, but increasing the literacy of using the medium to increase literacy in many, many ways. And one of the things that's really been bothering me lately, not just me, but a lot of people, is our civil rights literacy. And so I had met a very nice gentleman in a conference in Brazil. I was invited to a conference, a Comic-Con in Brazil. I was invited out to CCXP in Brazil. And I met a very nice gentleman who actually had run the Mad magazine office there for decades. He was a cartoonist in his own right. And I'm like, well, we were talking about all sorts of things that are going on in the world. And so what we did was we collaborated and created this little one pager just on, what to do if ICE knocks on your door. So this is, I need to figure out a way to share this more readily, but it is in a couple anthologies, and it's just a real quick way of just sort of humorously saying, what are your rights and what to do when that happens. And this is just something that was fun, but also educational, and I think very important. So I'm going to stop there. And if you've got more, let me see if we've got some questions here. But back to this idea of passion, right? You have to find your way. And I say, what is your advice who want to do these things is figure out your way into what inspires you. And to me, it's not just about entertainment, but it's very much about, what do these comics mean to people? If it increases literacy, if it increases civil rights literacy, if it inspires people to do things, that's what I really love about being a comics writer. I should also, and I think all of you know this, right? We all have different roles, right? I don't draw. Some people do, but I am the essentially what one would call the screenwriter, right? I create the story. And the pacing, and generally speaking, the cast of characters. And that's also something I found to be incredibly revealing to me when I first started, is that the writer has a lot of power. And that's something where it's, the casting, if you're going to complain about why are all these characters of just one ethnicity or one gender or whatever, it really becomes, it's the writer. And so that's another reason why I was like, I gotta do this, because I can make a difference in terms of how I go about casting all these stories, what the good story is going to be about, and all these things, just like, it's very important. And that's why diversity and just encouraging people to enter this field. And, if you have somebody who's young, who wants to do this, they must do this, because if there's a dearth of stories, if there's a dearth of Indigenous stories, it's because we're not encouraging people to enter this field, or not creating the opportunities for people. And so I think this is something that needs to happen. And I hope that I'm playing a small part in encouraging, just by the fact that I'm occupying the space and doing the panels that John sees and representing, because I've had a number of young Asian women and Asians in general coming up and say, it's just very inspiring to see someone who, like myself, doing this. And, I just feel like, well, as much as it's super hard, it's very tiring. And sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? I just want to stop. It just keeps me going. So all these things in the end, it's to say, back to this whole idea, follow your passion is not that simple, right? Sometimes it's follow what you need to do certain things. Back to this journey of taking, again, I started off with these stupid degrees. I shouldn't call them stupid, right? Because they're credentialing. But I often get the question of like, well, why? Why am I doing this? And back to when I graduated from MIT, before I started Harvard, I actually spent a number of years working in nonprofit. So I was working for these grassroots organizations. And for a brief period, I was actually chair of the Chinatown Tourism Council, back in the 90s. And, like I've always felt a very strong need to work in a way that had a, more impact, I guess. And, it just seems like the right time with comics, because everyone reads comics without realizing they're reading comics. And I think that's also super important. And the more I do that, and I recently just started teaching at the School of Visual Arts, and I'm also teaching at the Kubert School, is imparting this knowledge to people so they can go forth and do more of this stuff, and hopefully changing minds about the value of comics and what it all means. This is what I'm sort of focused on. Now, if I don't see more questions, I'm just going to go ahead and start. And if John wants to jump in, I'm happy to, do that too. Now, I do see a question here. What is your advice for young people who want to be graphic novelists too? And I'm getting a fair amount of that. In fact, I'm having lunch with somebody on Monday. And it's, first of all, why does one want to be a graphic novelist? And I actually don't care. Everyone should try this. In fact, wouldn't it be wonderful if it was mandatory, just like my 6th grade class, to actually create something? I think we're in the era of consumption and not creation. And right, we're consuming TikTok. Watch any kid, it's just TikTok. And it seems to me the vast majority aren't even creating their own TikToks, they're just consuming TikToks. And I feel like we do need to reverse this flow creatively, is that encourage people, to make things and to tell their own stories. And I think that's very important, right? So my advice is, and this sounds trite, but it's what I did, is just do it. Don't think about it too hard. I can't tell you how many people I've run into say, I would love to do it. If you want to do it, just do it. Okay. This is an entirely different technological era. I mean, in the past, it's slightly different, where you may have to offset your, print offset, and, this nowadays, you can just literally do it and put it up as an Instagram comic, as a web comic. It doesn't cost you anything. The only thing it might cost you is your personal, you're like, oh my God, it's terrible. We all think that way. First of all, everything I put out, I believe is terrible. If you like it, that's awesome. But deep down, I think it's terrible. So you just need to get over that. I can't believe I just said that, but it's true. Okay. You have to get over that. Any young people actually are much better at this. They're like, oh, this is great. Let me just put it out there. It's like, don't lose that. But young people, just go ahead and do it. but also understand its craft. There is a craft behind it, and learn the craft as much as possible, but don't let that hold you up. It's the adults who are like, I can't do it. I don't have time. I don't, whatever. And for you older folks, and I would say older, like I said, I had a 30-year gap between being 12 and being 42 starting comics. Okay. So if I can do it, you can do it. Okay. Don't wait too long, okay? Because at a certain point you're like, but I was back at the Harvard Business School. I was on the alumni board, and one of the other board members, he was 75, and he just really took to my talk when I was talking about how I made this career transition, and he just started painting. Okay, he's been painting for the last 5 years, and now he's doing painting competitions. He's doing his own shows. And I feel great because he says, but it's not me. I mean, maybe I was a little bit of a catalyst, but I was like, don't wait, just do it. What are you waiting for? There's nothing to wait for, right? Yeah, so back to, well, let me answer this question, Paul, and then John can jump in. And yes, you don't have to draw, you can write, you can write and draw. The writing part is, again, there is a craft to it. And one should learn how to do it. You don't just randomly write for comics. What you're doing is you have to understand that you're writing for the art team. So what it is like being an architect. And I use that term because I studied architecture. I studied architectural design at MIT. What you're doing is you're not creating the actual finished product. You are creating the blueprint for the other people, which are the penciler, the inker, the colorist, the letterer, and maybe the editor, to actually make the comic. And so your job is to enable that as much as possible by creating the story. So it is very different from poetry, prose, and you have to understand that that's the craft. Now that is very similar to writing a screenplay. That's similar to writing animation. So if your students want to do that, they should do it. But also understand that there is a format and there is a discipline to it that they should learn, because it's hard. I just spent all of last night into like 3 a.m. struggling with an Avatar story, Airbender Avatar story. And the reason I was struggling, you're like, well, you just spit it out. It doesn't work that way. We have to be concerned about scene transition. We have to be concerned about page count. And if something changes, that moves everything around. And you don't just spew out stuff in words. What we're doing is we're creating a structure that somebody has to draw off of. And so if I don't do it correctly, it messes everything up. And so, that kind of, it's really hard. Imagine you're writing haiku all the time. You're spending so much time wordsmithing, but with creating a structure that requires a certain kind of discipline. And in the end, you do it perfectly and it lacks soul, it lacks emotion, is no good. So you got to start again. Anyway.
When you are working on a project like Avatar, you already have these points of reference for the art styles and how the characters look and feel. But when you're working on an original story like this one that you've done with Janet, what is that process like for you as the writer to find the artist that feels or sees this story the same way you do? How do you make that work?
Oh, okay. So yeah, so comics is a collaboration, and certain art styles are important for the story. If we're writing something like I just did a horror story, right? You kind of want to find the right artist for that. But a lot of it is like, how do you find the right artist? Sometimes the artist finds you. Now, Sky Island and Sea Sirens, Janet came up with the characters first, and she's looking for a writer to flesh it out. That's more unusual, frankly. Usually it's the other way around. But it's like partners trying to find each other. And part of it is we had worked together on a short story. So a little bit of it is a little bit like dating, you get a feel for who you who you click with, okay, and who you can create good work with. And so sometimes it's not so much just the style, is the style of the person. The personality of the person is very important. And so, you can absolutely just go look and see, oh, I like this person's style, I like this, but you have no idea how they work, and you have no idea how they're going to interpret your script. So more often than not, I find it's just really good to make friends with a lot of artists and see who you click with, Now, we don't always have a choice. If it's a licensed project like Avatar or anything I do for DC and Marvel, I can say who I'd like to work with, and they may or may not listen. But it's also, you have to understand, artists don't work on multiple, they usually only work on one project at a time, because it takes a lot of work. You're drawing a full page a day, and most people need at least 2 days to complete that page. If I as a writer, we can work on multiple projects, but generally speaking, I may want to work with the artist, but they're already on another book. They'd have to walk off to work on my project. So we don't always get what we want. But a lot of times it's really just, I'd love to work with this person. Are they available? Are we simpatico? Awesome, let's do it. And that generally, I think, yields the best results.
Just looking at Paul's second question, he says, I've got some students who said they want to learn how to write for comics. Now, I've had this conversation with a couple other authors who are considering stepping into this world, and they're trying to figure out how you separate direction and information from dialogue and internal dialogue. Is there a way you can delve into that for Paul's question? They want to learn how to write for comics, but they don't.
Yeah, when you're writing for comics, there is a structure. There is a basic structure. Now, it's not so rigid as I found out, because I got so many notes back on my first script for Netflix. They're very format. You have to do things in a certain. In comics, you can whatever font. It's fine, and when you're doing TV, 12-point Courier, it absolutely, even just to the point of underlining and things like that, they're very much frowning on any deviation from that. Comics is a lot easier, but there's some basic things, right? We as writers, we're responsible. Page 1, panel 1, the panel breakdowns, panel description, dialogue, sound effects. Okay, so there's a clear delineation, because dialogue and sound effects is for the letterer, panel description is for the artist and the colorist, right? So they have to know you're delineating where, and for the editor, they need to be able to read the whole thing. Okay, so I hope this is answering your question.
Yeah.
There's part of that, but you also do not want to, in my opinion, over direct, and I see this coming more from visual folks, especially artists who are like, okay, 3/4, aerial view, just things that, to the point where, if you want to get to that detail, draw it, because the best collaboration is to allow somebody to bring their experience to the table and their interpretation to the table. I do find that when you're working with someone less experienced, then yeah, you need to do a little more art direction. You say like, panel 1, page 1, panel 1, aerial view, pull back, establishing shot, right? Because sometimes people don't realize that you need to have some contrast. Start with establishing shot, but now we got to get into a close shot. All those things in general, you want to give to that artist, but if you start getting too detailed, you're not letting them do their job. And it's going to be vice versa, right? If somebody's micromanaging my writing, I do find it difficult, because it's like, okay, who's driving this car, right? At a certain point, you hired me to do this thing, let me do this thing. If I'm not doing it right, you got to let me know. But right, I need to have enough latitude to be able to do my interpretation of what's going on here. So there's that. But when you are just starting off, you're allowed to make mistakes, but it's always good to work with somebody who is much more experienced, in which case, don't over direct somebody who knows better than you what to do.
Do you do any kind of thumbnailing for your artist?
Oh, so I wouldn't do that. You can. Some artists don't mind. If you thumbnail for you, because it helps you visualize, which I did initially. I don't do that anymore. I thumbnail my head, for the most part. But and this is why it's important to find somebody that you can work with. Some artists actually enjoy it, but you start getting into their territory if you're telling them how to do the layout. Okay. And again, some artists don't mind, and some artists might even welcome it. But you got to be careful. And this is again why I say it's all in the relationship and communication. Just say, hey, how would you like this? Now, in general, especially if you're doing this as a freelancer, like I do as a licensed person, you are coming up with a full script. You're not providing thumbnails to anybody. An editor is going to want to prove that full script. And especially if you're doing a graphic novel that's being picked up by, say, Abrams or Simon & Schuster or Penguin Random House, you're going to want to see the full script usually, unless you're some kind of rock star and you're allowed to do all these thumbnails. People do want to see full script. And that in itself is a whole, craft to be able to do that.
When you first began writing for comics, what was the length of the work? Was it a 26 or 36 page comic or?
No. Okay. So, if you're talking about, it's all different now, first of all. I mean, let's expand our definition of comics, especially now you have a lot of digital comics and web comics. Okay, so the entry point is equally valid. Okay, but then the length is different. When you're getting into web comics, very possibly there is no length. It just keeps going, like an old web comic that we're familiar with. Now you've got vertical scrolling. Now, when I started, and I think what you're referring to is when I started getting DC and Marvel work, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You will almost never start with that length. Almost always they'll start you off with literally 4 pages, 8 pages, a short story. And that will be your entry, because God forbid, and this often happens, is first of all, can you do it in time? Can you do the story? And it's actually giving you quite a lot to say. Your average single issue monthly comic is going to be 20 pages. You're not going to get a series right away, unless perhaps you're some platinum selling rap star or something where they know we'll fix it. Well, just bring your fan base. That's just purely economics, right?
Right.
More often than not, if you're a new writer or a new artist, they'll try you out. They'll try you out on something short and just see how you do. Throw you a crumb. But it's also really, are you a good writer? That's how you start. Single issues are also pretty tough to get right now. So I went from doing a couple shorts, that Wonder Woman story I talked about, pretty much to 6 issues of Poison Ivy. So it wasn't even an ongoing series, it was 6 issues of Poison Ivy. But that was a huge jump for me, because what I'm doing is going from the most I'd ever written was 10 pages to suddenly 120 pages. It's the equivalent of a graphic novel. So
it's like running to the store and then running a marathon.
Oh, yeah. And I've run marathons, okay? And that's when you realize that you have to train up to run a marathon. I am the worst runner in the world, but I do stupid things like deciding I want to make comics, I want to run a marathon. And then you quickly realize, what have I done, right? It's terrible. It's a terrible experience. And by the time you finish it, you wish you're going to die. You feel like you're going to die, right? And it's the same thing. After you finish 120 pages, I'm like, I think I'm going to die. But when people read the book and they like it, and you're like, I'm not going to die after all. This is amazing. Same thing with the marathon. You finish it and you look at like, I actually finished that and the time was okay. And maybe I could run it better. I've stopped doing that because it's stupid, but I'm still writing and I'm still trying to get better at it every time. So, yeah.
So then I guess going back to the advice for these newbie, would like to be authors is just do it, start.
Just do it, but don't run the marathon, run the 5K, do the 5 pages first, do the 8-page story. 8 pages is the sweet spot in my opinion. Anybody who wants to do this, don't do the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Start with the 8 pages, do an 8-page, and you can do a lot in 8 pages. And this will be the test, because you're like, I can't do it in 8 pages. Yes, you can. If you can't do it in 8 pages, it's a non-starter, because that's all you're going to get. If you really aspire and you feel like the way that you're going to break in is you must write for one of these mainstream people, that's all you're going to get. So if you can't do it in 8 pages, you're not going to get there. Okay. You can do whatever you want on your own, but that's pretty much what you got to do. So start small. In fact, whether you're drawing or writing, because what it is timed. It is timed. You have to be able to do this within the time allotted. So if you cannot do 8 pages in a week, it's going to be very hard for you to make a living doing this.
Okay, I got one more for you.
Yeah.
Write every day or write when the muse strikes.
Oh my God. Okay, so it's got to be in the middle, because I also don't believe you can write every day. Some days is you need to be able to think every day, but to be able to just spew things out, you're not a factory, okay?
Right.
But to wait until the muse hits, it's like, now go find the muse. If it's not hitting, go find the muse. Get yourself out of the house, go around and get to the point where you can start writing again. Because if you're waiting, it's, you know, it's not super productive. And like I said, you know, life is short, and if you want to get the thing done, get the thing done. Really, you do need to be able to write 20 pages in a week to really do this and pay your rent or mortgage. Okay, that's the hard fact. Okay, if you got another job, awesome, and you can do this on the side, but that's the pace at which professional writers are writing. And I don't want to be like, you need to be like Stephen King. Okay, you don't need to be super prolific, but don't be like, okay, I'm just not feeling it. I'm just not feeling it. You got to go and somehow, you know, go out there and get into that headspace where you can start writing. And the writing part, what counts is even just, and I do this all the time, just jot some things on the phone. So at least you get into the practice of, okay, well, at least I wrote something and I got something out there. The problem is you write something and you're just going to tear it down again. And, you know, if you're not writing anything, you can't even do that process. So you have to at least write something that you can revise. So that would be my strong advice to everybody, whether you're young or old. Young people have less problems doing this because they'll just start doodling. They'll start doodling and doing other things and jotting things down. They don't have the inhibitions we have as adults where we feel like, well, it's got to be perfect. It does not have to be perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. Even when it hits the printer, it's still not perfect. So you just got to get over that. You can say it's perfect when it comes out, but right, we have those hangups as adults. It's like, no, it's not done. It's not done. It's, you know, I'm not ready. Kids are just like, oh, here it is, and it's lovely. So you need to reconnect with your inner child and just say, here it is, and people are like, oh, okay, nice. Just get over that hang up, you know.
All right. So to wrap things up, 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. What do you got coming out?
Oh, shameless self-promotion. Holy cow. Well, I just talked about the Asian American graphic novel thing that's coming out recently. I have, this is kind of huge for me, a graphic novel called Carmilla, the First Vampire. And it's an adaptation inspired by the original Carmilla, who predates Dracula by a couple of decades. And it's set in New York City, Chinatown, 1996. That will be coming out through Dark Horse, through Karen Berger's imprint, Berger Books, in January. And of course, I had to put in some Chinese American history in there just to like be consistent. But also I felt as I was writing it, I realized people don't really understand, right? My grandfather came to the US 100 years ago, right? He grew up in this country. And yet it was kind of like, right, we're still kind of outsiders, and that's kind of a theme in the book. And so I just wanted to make sure there's a bit of that, because otherwise I feel like I'm not doing right by the Chinatown, especially New York City Chinatown. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, by the way. I'm from Iowa, okay? They were like, oh, it's autobiographical. No, I didn't grow up in Chinatown, but it is reflective of some of my experience, and it just made for a richer story. So if you want to get a dose of American history. It is American history. It's just not reflected as much in textbooks, as well as some gory vampire. It's not even that gory. It's creepy. I've been told it's very creepy. So that's my shameless self-promotion right there. Oh, I realized, are we over?
We are. I just know that's fine. We're good.
I'm so sorry. Wow. Yeah, and that was a lot to write. That was a huge amount of work, and I hope people enjoy it. It's gotten some really good buzz, so I'm very proud of it. And that's happening. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Really appreciate that you got to break away from Parents Weekend at school to join us for this event. It's wonderful. Always, I learned something from you. So thank you, Amy.
oh no, thank you. I learned so much from you too, and just from this entire event. I'm sorry I went over. I kind of got carried away. I am happy to talk to anybody at any convention or any library conference. I love talking about this stuff. You can follow me on Twitter, AMYCHU, where I may or may not pontificate on things, or Instagram, Amy_Chu. But I do love talking about craft, and I do love the idea of people just, even if you didn't want to do it like myself, just go ahead and try it out. And who knows, look what happens. You could be like me, suddenly doing all these things and making books, making comics, and now making, I guess, TV. So that's a whole new thing for me.
Kind of nice. Far cry from that original degree, right?
Yeah, again, another cautionary tale. Don't just go with whatever you thought you were going to do when you went to the career office and look at this path. What color is my parachute? That just went all out the window. So
I need 5 parachutes to choose from.
yeah, just do what floats your boat, and maybe it happens to be comics right now, which is what I'm doing. So.
Right. Well, again, thank you very much. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, Pixton and Scholastic, and everybody who are on the team at Reading with Pictures that helped put this wonderful event together.
Yes, all of
yes,
you.
Huge round of
And
applause.
to all the teachers out there. I didn't even make my plug. I'm on the board of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. And we just had a significant victory over genderqueer. So this is I wanted to talk a lot about that. That's a whole nother 45 minutes of just trying to preserve our rights and the kids' rights to read and teach with what you want to teach. And yeah, unfortunately, we can't talk about that. But anybody who's coming to Baltimore Comic-Con, I will definitely be talking about that as well. So
all right, see you there.
All right. Nice to see everyone. Nice to see you again, John.
Take care, Amy. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, with that, we wrap things up. Have a lovely weekend, the rest of your weekend, folks. Take care and thank you.